like to offer a prayer for the Bowl family.
Oh, yeah.
Bob died.
Who did?
Bob Bowl.
Oh,
So
no.
we got the message from the church that Bob passed away this week.
Wednesday, I think.
Had he already died and somebody found him?
I think he was in a nursing home. I mean, he was
Oh, I
in a
didn't know, because
facility.
I'm glad, because my thoughts were he was at home and
No.
died at home.
No,
And his
no.
kids hadn't been to visit him and it would be,
No, he
Oh.
was in
Oh,
something.
my husband will be upset to know.
yeah,
He's been in there for a week or two.
okay, well, I'm glad to hear that because that relieves, anyway, his family, I'm sure it's hard for them, and so,
And keep Kim on there, please.
yes.
But you know what? They've known it for a while, but it's still a hard thing to deal with.
Yeah, and the
Yeah,
church
sure.
put it, we got the message from the church, normally I get emails from the funeral home.
What did he do?
I don't know, all it said was keep the whole family in your prayers because Bob passed away this week.
He's had a lot of different things, you know, for a while. A lot of different things.
Anyway, that's my prayer for the day, we can go on and keep all the people who are ill, keep our doctors and nurses healthy as they treat all of these people who are coming in to their offices. We ask these things in thy name, amen.
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 Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Okay, thank you for the prayer.
Well, it's kind of short.
We'll hope for that.
It covered the ground. It covered the ground, yeah.
Yeah. Today, we're going to start on a subject which the more I looked into, the more fascinating it becomes. It's like going down a rabbit hole. Now, I mean, this stuff is very interesting, and it affects the backbone, the fundamental backbone of Christianity. It doesn't just affect the people who suffer from anti-Semitism. And there's 3 periods of anti-Semitism that this story could be divided into very roughly. And, the first question is, how could a Christian movement, Christian church, whether Protestant or Catholic, how can the church, based on, it's supposed to be the religion of a Jewish prophet or Jewish, people saw him as a Jewish priest early on. Now, within the religion, oftentimes people say, well, he was a pre-existing divine being. But at any rate, he was Jewish. He was born from Jewish people and the Jewish God, and lived in a Jewish culture, in a Jewish land, and he preached to Jews, and he preached the Jewish law and worshiping the Jewish God and the coming of a new millennia with or a new existence on the earth where the kingdom of the Jewish God would be established and Jews would be placed in charge of running things under this benevolent Jewish God. So how can this translate into anti-Semitism in all the ways that we've seen it in the Christian church? Well, we're going to start and go backwards here real quick. I'm just going to categorize it as 1, 2, 3. 1 being the most recent, and that is the type of anti-Semitism that we find when we look at the Holocaust or some of the pogroms that have taken place in various places. And the reason that this is so different is because it's a racial basis, and it kind of grew out of a lot of work by anthropologists in the 19th century, the 1800s. And there were a lot of people who were very keen on this idea, that there are the Aryan peoples and black peoples and Orientals, and they saw the Jew as a separate race. And if you had
But why is that?
we're going to get to that.
Oh, okay.
Because that's not our subject for today. This is number 3.
Okay.
This is the most recent. No, it's an excellent question. Why is
Okay.
that? But the first thing I'm just going to mention is that it's like your blood is tainted, so that you know, the rumor went out from Hitler's half-brother that Hitler had a Jewish grandfather. And he was like always, he hated that, or anybody who had a taint of Jewish blood. Whereas in the two previous periods, you'll find, how do you quit being persecuted as a Jew? What could you do? Say under the Christian year, just as an aside, if you are a Jew and you're being persecuted, and this is 1,000 years ago, not in the modern sort of racial thing, what could you do to quit the persecution? If you were grabbed by the Spanish Inquisition and they said, you are Jewish, what could you do to remove the anti-Semitic pressure?
So you weren't, I mean.
Well, you can say you weren't, but you
could pass.
You could, yeah, you're not really gonna pass because you're standing in front of the Spanish Inquisition. They got guards at the door, and they say, we found this, you know, the Torah, we found, you know, whatever.
I don't know what you could do.
What-
Die.
Just lie about it.
No, what?
Just lie about it.
No,
No.
they know.
Marry a Gentile.
Well, marry a Gentile, but more specifically, you can't, you probably,
Just convert. A lot of the.
just convert.
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 Yeah, you
Oh,
can
yeah.
say, okay, I quit, I'm canceling my, you know, my
My Jewish.
I'm going on the computer and I'm canceling my Jewish subscription and I'm signing up on Christian.com. you
Yeah.
know. So it was a social and religious and cultural thing, because there were a lot of cultural practices that you know, like circumcision, that were associated with it. But you could cure that in the most modern, which we'll talk about in another time, the most modern iteration of this. You can't cure it. You're Jewish. You try to pass as a Christian. You convert to Christianity. Where do you end up? Where would Nazis put you?
Jewish.
In the concentration.
Yes, in the they'd give you a gold star and they'd put you in the concentration
you.
camps or the death camps. Yeah. So that's not cured by conversion. That's like blackness in the old South. One drop of black blood in your family and you are I won't use the word.
Yeah.
But it's a vicious thing. You know, you can be like, there was a woman who did she wrote a book or an article called My Body is a Relic of Slavery, because she went to one of these ancestry.coms or whatever, and she's black, and her parents are black, and her grandparents are black, and yet she's got more white DNA than she has black DNA. So, but she would be considered, especially in the Old South or even in a lot of places today, they'd immediately identify her and categorize her because she is, you know, whatever degree, if you've got any degree of that blood, it's considered tainted to the prejudiced person.
But this
All
was
right.
just a dictator who decided this would be somebody to gain around, so everybody would love him, and you know, it could be happen to any kind of Chinese or
Yeah,
whatever.
we would say that, except that it's been a lot longer than just that one dictator, and it's been, I mean, you know, as soon as they got out of that particular frying pan, they got into another fire. Actually, it's more like getting out of the fire and into the frying pan, because it was a leisure, but they go to Israel or Palestine, set up a new nation, and they're gonna be wiped into the sea. So it's not just like that's going to be something that ends in 1945 with Hitler going down. Okay, now we're going to reach back a little further. We're going to talk a lot about Christians versus Jews and how it's unlike the prejudice against Jews that existed before Christianity. And that is that, okay, if you have a disagreement with somebody that you go to school with, that can have a certain amount of animosity. But if you have a problem with your sister, how is that going to be more trouble, or is that going to be less trouble? Not necessarily your own sister, but what you've seen with other people, huh? Okay. Which does this sound like more? You know, family feuds within a family. Is that more like a healthy disagreement, or is that more like a blood feud where you wanna,
It's a blood feud.
It's a blood
You might
feud.
not talk to them again in their whole life.
that's right. And a family,
Crazy.
sibling rivalries and fights within family often assume the hatred and ferocity of a blood feud.
Yeah.
You may be willing to extend Christianity to people who are in prison, who committed all these terrible crimes, but if they say, how many people in your family have you not talked to for the last 5 years because you disagree with their life choices, you'll go,
Whoops.
oh. And now they're mad at you for bringing that up. All right. So there's a deep Christian versus Jew anti-Semitism, but it's theologically based, and it's deep, and it's violent, and it helps set up. But for this heritage, you wouldn't have the Hitlers or people like that, or the pogroms in Russia. But this is theologically based, and it's much more interesting than you'd think it would be.
When did it start?
We're going to get to that. That's what this.
We're not going to push him out.
Well, I can't say it without starting out with the third one, which was anti-Semitism against the Jews prior to the Christian church becoming a strong entity. So when I talk about this, I'm talking about I'm talking about against a number of countries where the Jews faced criticism or prejudice, but it was a social and cultural basis. And again, could they cure this? If you're a Jew living in the Jewish kingdoms under Greek rule or under Roman rule, could you solve any problems you have by being identified as a Jew? What could you do?
Probably nothing.
You could. You could turn it around like that.
You could have your own little community.
Well, no,
Okay,
you're still
convert to whatever
different.
they're wanting.
What, convert? Yes, exactly. You
So
could convert to
basically
their.
wipe out the Jewish religion.
You could convert to their religion, and you could convert to their societal norms.
But they might not have wanted to.
Yeah, they didn't want to, or they would have. But the thing is that there's a cure. Or what I'm saying is that to compare with the modern, blood thing where it's where it's considered a race, before it was considered a religion and a cultural norm, not a race.
Oh.
So if your father was Jewish and he converted to Christianity and you got married, people didn't really care, if he was a good Christian.
So this is a little off the subject, but I am curious. It's still Judaism. It's been my understanding that the Judaism is passed down through the mother.
No. Judaism is highly patrilineal. It's when you are, David Ben Gurion, you're the David son of Gurion or whatever. That's always, you trace it down. As a matter of fact, there's a huge thing in the Bible, in the book of Mark, that raised the hackles on some of the early church fathers, and they really hated this, but it was in all the versions, so they left it in, it was when Jesus went to his hometown, and which was probably Capernaum, and he went to his hometown, and people were saying, isn't that just, Jesus? We know him. Isn't that the Jesus that grew up here? They say, isn't that the son of Mary? Aren't these his sisters and brothers, blah, blah. And to say the son of Mary, you won't find that anywhere else in the Bible. They'll say he's Mary's son, but the son of Mary meant one thing.
She wasn't married.
She was not married. And that sticks out like a sore thumb. And so the early, I think, Augustine, who later became St. Augustine, was one that had particular trouble with this. I think it was Augustine, but it's just like, because there were rumors also, even addressed in the book of John, where he says, it's not true, this foolishness people say about me being born of a Roman or whatever, illegitimate child. So he addresses illegitimacy in 2 books of the Bible.
Huh.
Because that's the only thing they say about Jesus' birth is son of Mary in Mark, because they don't talk about this virgin birth and all that stuff. All right, so let's get back to subject. So you
We'll
have,
keep you off of it.
no, but it's all good stuff. This is a
Yeah,
heck of a
it's
lot
good.
more fun to me than
good.
getting up here and lecturing and then having to wake you all up at the end of this. All right. So before this period of Christian versus Jewish anti-Semitism, we're going to look back further. The classical anti-Semitism between the powers that be then, the countries that be, and the Jews.
What time frame are you talking about?
Jesus' time frame?
Up to and through Jesus' time frame, and actually through a little later, because we're going to be talking about some things that occurred before the church became a big power. It was in the early period of the church and the latter period, because that was also the period where there was a lot of change in the Jewish religion. It became much more conservative, much more theologically, less active. We'll see. All right. First, though, who in the Bible, who is the country that is like? Well, who's a sports fan in here? Anybody? All right. Who's your favorite team?
San Muriel.
Who? No. Who's your favorite team?
Oh, St. Louis Cardinals.
St. Louis Cardinals. And who are the Cardinals' biggest rival?
Oh, it used to be the Dodgers.
Okay, let's say the Dodgers or the Cubs. Okay. Now, if St. Louis gets beat by the Oakland A's, you're not happy about that. But if St. Louis gets beat by the Cubs, are you more mad about that?
Probably, sure.
Yeah, probably. It's like, if your neighbor across the street gets a good job that you wanted, it's like, yeah, okay. If your brother gets a good job you wanted, you're like, argh. All right. And that doesn't reflect on me and my family. I don't care what my brother does. He's fine. He's cool. He's a pilot. But who is the group that, and it's not too hard to see, who's the group that comes in for a lot of mention in the Bible as the evil guys?
The Romans?
No, before that.
Greeks?
The Romans, in a lot of ways, are actually made out as pretty good guys.
Egypt.
Before that, the Egyptians. Egyptian, to speak in Egyptian, to speak the word Egyptian, which apparently I cannot do, was like a pejorative term. It's like calling somebody,
Yeah.
a wop or something. It had this connotation. I don't know if they had slang terms for them, but Egyptian could be used almost like an adjective to mean evil, like German was during World War I or World War II, or Japanese. You said Japanese, people already start, growling. So the traditional, the Jewish people, and of course they have a different history. They don't have the same history that we have in Exodus, and we were not going to talk about whether archaeology supports the idea of how many people that they said left and how long they were in the desert. Okay, let's avoid that. But just say that the Egyptians, and who lived down just on the eastern part of the Mediterranean, east-west coast, and their empire often extended up into the area that became the Jewish kingdoms. So that at the time when they said that the Jews went from Exodus, they'd actually be going from Egypt to Egypt, because Egypt controlled that area at the same time. Anyway, but they had a lot of animosity. And then what nation swept out of their country? Well, the Jews had a lot of enemies at various times. Armies would come to besiege them. Some conquered them, some didn't. The Babylonians, what happened after Babylon captured the Jews? Jerusalem. what did they do with the Jewish people once they
Put
captured
them
them?
into slavery,
Well, yeah, where did they take them?
back to their homeland,
Which was
Babylon.
Babylon, yeah. Oh, that we, what is it, by the waters of Babylon, we lay down and wept and remembered Zion. You know, their memories are home country. And then Cyrus the Great, the Persian, came and defeated the Babylonians, and the Jews were free to go home. Though apparently not all of them left Babylon. But, so they've had some very vicious enemies, or serious enemies before. But what country, in our classical period, that we draw a lot of heritage, what country boiled out and pretty much conquered, you know, just most of the known world?
Alexander?
Alexander the
Rome.
Great. What's that?
Rome.
Later, but Alexander. Okay, so Alexander swept from there to the east. He took over Egypt. He took over all the countries associated with the Jewish kingdoms and
Oh,
pushed.
that's all that Mesopotamia area and the whole.
Yeah,
all
he
of it.
conquered all of that, and then coming back, he died, I think, in Baghdad. So his massive world-reaching kingdom, it wasn't all the world, he didn't conquer Italy. He didn't try, he was going to go that next. But they divided it up. What happens when a strong man dies?
A lot of littler strong men take over.
Yes, sometimes a single person can take the reins, but oftentimes, like you said, and this is what happened with Alexander's land. It was way too big administratively anyway to run as one kingdom. So what they did was, I think originally it started out with 5 of his principal generals, each had their own little empire, and very quickly 2 of those fell by the wayside somehow and it was incorporated in the others, but there were 3. And the one that concerns us at first was the one that controlled Egypt and the area of the Jewish kingdoms. And that was Ptolemy. The general's name was Ptolemy, so it's called Ptolemaic Empire. And the Ptolemaic Empire, now,
Is that before Jesus, Ptolemy?
Oh, yeah, this is,
Way before Jesus.
this is,
Okay.
yeah, it's several hundred years before Jesus.
Okay.
And so Ptolemy, who was the last, anybody want to guess who the last Ptolemaic ruler that you know of? You know their name? You know her name? The last Ptolemaic ruler of Egypt?
Her, Cleopatra.
Cleopatra, right.
Oh.
When Cleopatra
When you
used to
said her.
snake,
We knew then.
well, yeah, but you know, that's good history knowledge. But boy, she's an interesting person too, but let's not get there. They could make a movie about her.
Was she Christian or Jew?
No, she was neither. She was Ptolemaic Greek. So the old Egyptian, you know, before the Greeks, the Egyptian pharaohs were black. And after the Greeks took over, they were Greek. They called themselves pharaohs, but they were Greek. And they did this so they'd fit in with the local beliefs about gods and such. But now they had some anti-Semitism. But it was this social cultural thing, because the Greeks, who did the Greeks consider the peak of the intellectual world?
Socrates.
Well, Socrates is a good example. What country did Socrates come from? Plato was another one. Where did they come from? Greece. So the Greeks thought who were the best intellectual people in the world? Yes. The Greeks had a deservedly high opinion of their own intellectual development, or at least philosophical development. You know, they calculated the circumference of the world to within, we're not quite sure the measure that they used, we're not quite sure if it was like this or whatever. They could have done it exactly, but they were certainly super close, because if you take one end of what we think that measure was, like, you know, we have a foot and it's 12 inches. Well, they had a measure, and there's a little argument about exactly how long that measure was. But either way, it's almost exactly the circumference of the world.
So
You know, they
they
knew the
know
world
the
was
earth
round.
was
Oh,
round?
yes, they knew the world was round.
Oh.
And they knew the world was round, and they did lots of things that are relevant today in terms of figuring out the way things work. And so what are they going to think of these people that say, oh, you're wrong, you're not only wrong, but you're gods or abominations, and you think they're up on Mount Olympus, and you have all these shrines with statues, and you are evil, and those are idols, and they're an abomination. What do you think the Greeks are going to think about that?
I think they drive them out, they wouldn't let them around them.
Well, they don't really, they think they're bumpkins. Now,
Oh.
they let them practice their strange procedures, although the one that they found worst was circumcision, because they go, we love the human body. Gymnasium means something about naked. And so when they did their sports, they did it naked. And just like
Oh, yeah.
just like our culture, I mean, we use attractive human beings to sell automobiles and sports and stuff, and watch dancers. You don't have to be a weird person to watch a ballet dancer and say, oh my God, she's beautiful. She has the grace of an angel. It's just a beautiful thing to watch. Any sort of dancing done well. It's gorgeous. And the Greeks loved the human body and thought it was wonderful, and you should keep it in shape. And, so the idea of circumcision is just like, oh, they go, God, that's mutilation. That's pointless mutilation.
So the Olympics started with them.
It did. The Olympics started with
Olympics
them.
were all done in the nude.
What's that?
The Olympics were all, the first Olympics in Olympia, Greece, were all done in the nude.
Oh, yeah, sure, just like he said.
Yeah.
Yeah. They probably didn't have the Winter Olympics back then.
Probably not. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, they all were Greek gods, weren't
huh?
they? They were all Greek gods.
No, they weren't. No. Some of them look like me. Not that bad, but actually. All right. So now but there's an odd thing too, is that the Ptolemaic Greeks were pretty understanding, and they were like, yeah, okay, you can practice your old religion, it's old and recognized, and we're very interested in mythical things, and we intellectually study lots of the religions of the East. And they even went so far, one of the emperors, Ptolemy, one of the Ptolemaic emperors, had the Old Testament translated into Greek. It's called what? Anybody know?
No idea.
Because this was called the Septuagint, which means 70s, which meant like 70 scholars copying it all out, and then they compared, and if 50 of the 70 had a passage translated just the same way, that was the vast majority, and they'd accept that translation. There weren't 70 translators, but there were several or a bunch that were working on this.
So it was translated from what language?
Hebrew.
Hebrew into their
Greek.
language.
Right.
Okay, at that time.
And we'll find later, for a short period, it was even accepted when you'll find out the Hebrews, the Jews, were also proselytizing. They weren't later, but in the period before the Christian church took place, once the Jews got kicked out of their area, especially once they had their power pushed pretty much out of the Jewish kingdoms, they started proselytizing, and they were in competition with the early Christian church. And they used the Septuagint because who were they translating? What was the language of the people they were trying to convert to Judaism? Greek, right, Greek. And all the early Christian church documents were in Greek. They have a couple of Aramaic words scattered in there, but it's in a Greek book, and there'll be like 10 Aramaic words in a Greek book of one of the Gospels. Even though Jesus and his followers spoke Aramaic. But you'll find that for a while, the Jewish church even accepted the Septuagint as authoritative, as just like the Jewish translation. That ended, and there were a lot of mistakes in the Septuagint, but that's ahead of us. So all right, now if you have a ruling power, conquering power that takes over, is it easier for me, let's say I move in, let's say I'm the king of Arkansas, and I take over Missouri. Not that I'd want it, or not that I'd want to, but let's say I'd take over Missouri, okay? Is it easier for me to hire Missouri people to do my bidding and, you know, suck out all the money and help keep these people
Sure.
kind of in line? Or is it better for me to hire people from, let's say Georgia, that don't have any?
Missouri people, pay them to suck the money out.
No,
No?
Georgia
No.
people?
Georgia people, why?
I have no
Because
idea.
they'll listen to you.
Because they'll listen to you, and because how many connections do they have, the people that live down the street?
None,
None.
none.
None. So it's easy to bring in sometimes outsiders. And so a lot of times you can find a minority group within an area, which is the Jews in the Ptolemaic Empire, and you can say, we want to pull them in to be administrators and people to be government workers, because they don't give a darn if we take all the tax money. They don't give a darn if these people don't, you
Yeah.
know.
Whoa,
Oh, that's true.
They
Yeah.
use outsiders. The British have done this an awful lot. When they had the revolt in Hungary in the 1950s, a lot of the Russian soldiers weren't too happy about, you know, they'd been in Hungary for a couple of years for their tour of duty. They'd gotten to know people, and they weren't too happy about participating in crushing these people. So after that, they could bring in people from, say, Central Asia who looked different, had different customs, had different languages, and they could be their government workers. Well,
wow.
now the Egyptian, there was no love lost already between Egypt and the Jews, and and when the Ptolemaic Greeks brought in people to act as administrators or workers, they were considered given favoritism because they were getting plum jobs, good salaries, and positions of power, and the Egyptians got even more ticked off. There was a pogrom in Alexandria in AD, in just, you know, around the time Jesus died. There was a pogrom against Jews because they go, oh, okay, these foreigners who've come in here and we don't like it, and they're taking our jobs. Gosh, doesn't that sound sort of okay?
They're dancing or something.
Yeah. All right. So, but then a big watershed occurred. Big change. And that was the Ptolemaic Greeks lost control of that area. And I don't know whether it's a war or negotiation, but another one of the great kingdoms that formed after Alexander died was the Seleucid Empire. And they came in, the Seleucid Greeks came in and took over. They were much more harsh against the Jews. They said that, you know, that these Jews, that, you know, the circumcision and the calendar that they're using is wrong, and, you know, there's just so many ridiculous things about the Jews. So they started to be much more oppressive.
After Jesus died?
No.
No.
This is still.
This is still before Jesus is born.
So my question is, what were they? I mean,
Greeks.
what religion?
Greeks.
What religion were they?
Oh, they worshipped.
Didn't they worship? They were polytheists. Didn't
They
they
were-
worship many gods?
Almost everybody in the whole world was
Yeah.
polytheism. Yes,
Yeah.
they were polytheistic. Yes,
Yeah.
and
So-
where did their gods live?
Mount Olympus.
Mount Olympus, and that, you know, some people
They
consider
built
that
those
just
high temples to them.
kind of, you know, just a sort of a stand-in for heaven. They didn't think necessarily that they lived actually on the
Right,
mountain,
yeah.
but some people probably did.
Yeah.
But yes, and who are some of the names we even remember today of their gods?
That was Zeus.
Zeus,
Apollo.
Apollo,
There's some women too.
huh?
There's some women.
Aphrodite is not a-
Aphrodite.
Or was she?
No.
She's a queen.
No,
She's a-
no, she's Aphrodite was.
I thought Aphrodite was.
Oh, no,
Pharaoh's wife.
Nefertiti or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, Aphrodite, she said.
Yeah. Oh,
No.
I thought you said Nefertiti.
No, Aphrodite.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's confusing because there's names like Zeus for the top god, and Jove was the Roman. You know, the Romans appropriated a lot of things from the Greeks, and one of the things was a system of gods, and they just changed the names. Changed the stories a little bit, but and then above them were the Titans who had created the first gods.
Zeus is father.
Yeah, they ate their children, it's
Yeah,
just not
yeah.
pretty. So at any rate, but the Seleucid Greeks were much less tolerant, and they were much, much more repressive. And the Jews got really ticked off because they were basically trying to stomp out Jewish practices and ways and force them to convert socially and religiously. And so the Jews revolted. There was a couple of brothers who were associated with it, leading this revolt. Does anybody know what their name is? It was the blank revolt. Starts with an M. Maccabean. The Maccabean revolt was around 167 to 160 BC, and they fought against the Romans, the Greeks, for 7 years, and they drove them out. And so when the Romans, so they had independence for a while. They thought, oh boy, we can have this revolt, we can bring in our own Jewish kingdom. And then if that happens, and then the Romans came in, are the Romans going to be inclined to hate the Jews because they became independent from the Greeks? Or are they going to tend to like the Jews because they don't like the Greeks either? They just defeated the Greeks, the Romans. Which one do you think?
Maybe they like the Greeks.
They liked them. Well, it gave them a natural alliance, so to speak.
They were tolerant of it.
Yes, and they allowed them limited self-government. In some places, the Roman Empire, they allowed king, like in this case in the early Jesus stories, King Herod, although the Romans did later roll that back somewhat and take more direct control, even during Jesus' life, I think. But they had limited self-government because they were anti-Greek. And then we have, I'm going to finish this up pretty quick, we have a series of disastrous wars where the Romans really got ticked off at them because there was all this fervor in Jesus' time about throwing out the Romans. Let's establish this Jewish apocalyptic kingdom of God by throwing out the Romans and having a new Messiah who will come and with a sword and God's help and angels' help will destroy the evil kingdoms of the world and bring in a permanent world ruled by God, kingdom of God. And so they, in a lot of, one of Jesus' disciples was a zealot, and the zealots were a group of one of the groups. Messianic Jews who thought that the end of the world was right now and that we should rise up and strike down the Romans and God will help us. So there was a war against Rome in AD 67 to 73. Now Jesus died about what year?
33.
Yeah, 30 to 33, yeah. And if you take the conventional timeline, yeah, it's 33. And so this is AD 67, and they overran the Roman garrison in Jerusalem. They destroyed, the Romans said, okay, we're going to put this down. They sent a legion, which is like an army division, and they destroyed that division. Okay, they go, all right, heck with this. So General Titus brings in 4 legions, and they conducted a campaign against the Jews in 70 AD, 40 years after Jesus has died, or almost 40 years. They took Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, burned down Jerusalem, and they made a Jewish tax. They made the Jews pay a tax after this war. And they used the tax funds for building a temple, a Roman temple in Rome, to one of their gods. Now, what would this violate in Jewish eyes?
There's money.
There's only one.
There's only one God, and you're building what? An idol. Yes, a graven idol.
In your opinion, is there any justification for anti-Semitism?
No,
Okay.
no, none. All right, so, and it's like, is there any justification for people's prejudice against black people? No, they're Americans. Their families have probably been here long before most other people's families were here, long before the American Revolution.
Or American Indian, is there a justification of Native Americans?
No.
No,
No.
no.
All right.
Well,
But no, there's not. But at any rate, I'll get through this real quick here in just a couple minutes. There were 3 wars. There was the first war, and one of the reasons why they did the Jewish tax, not only to build this Roman temple because it's antithetical to the Jewish religion to build an idol or make an idol, but also because at the time the Jews, not like later times, the Christians, but the Jews were proselytizing. The Jews were actively trying to bring people in, saying, the end of the world's at hand, you need to join up. And if you had to pay a tax when you were a Jew, that's going to discourage proselytism. Somebody could go, well, I kind of like philosophically what you're saying, but if I do this, it's going to raise my taxes. And that's discouraged it. Okay, so that war ended in AD 73. And then they had another war that mostly involved communities of Jews because they got sent out all over the world. There were still some in the Jewish area that had been Jewish kingdoms. But now there was a thing called the Kaitos War at 115 to 117 AD. So it's just about 50 years, it's about 40 years after the previous war. The Jews burned Alexandria, Egypt. That's going to make the Egyptians love them. And this was right in the middle of the Parthian Wars when the Romans were really having trouble with the Parthians. And so they felt like, oh, this is a real stab in the back. You take the time when we're most occupied in a desperate struggle against the Parthians to start rampaging. Most of this took place not in Israel, but around. So some people call it the Diaspora War, because diaspora is the people who got sent out from the Jews who got out. But during the Parthian War, Emperor Trajan dies, because he's become Trajan emperor. He died on his way back. And they rebuilt the ruined city of Jerusalem as a Roman city and put a temple to Jupiter on the Temple Mount, on the ruins of the Second Temple. So, now there's the Dome of the Rock Mosque up there.
Yeah,
Well,
still right?
there was the Jewish temple, and before that, after that, there was the Roman, temple.
Is it still there?
No,
Jerusalem?
no, the mosque, there's a mosque there,
Oh.
Dome of the Rock. Okay,
Dome of the Rock.
and Bar Kokhba revolt came another, 20 years later, 25 years later, and some of the people thought Bar Kokhba was the Messiah to finally liberate them. And the Romans sent 6 legions this time, and parts of 6 more. And the Bar Kokhba, I'm going to finish with this, the Bar Kokhba revolt greatly influenced the course of Jewish history and philosophy of the Jewish religion. Because despite the eventual easing of persecution of Jews, the Jews were barred from going to Jerusalem except for one ceremony. And Jewish messianic thought, the thought of we have to change, we have to prepare ourselves for the Messiah who's coming, and the kingdom of God is upon us, and we have to be ready and right with God because it's now. It's going to happen. Well, Jewish messianism was abstracted and spiritualized, and the rabbinical political thought became deeply cautious and conservative. And it was among the key events that's going to differentiate Christianity as a religion from Judaism, because Judaism had been active like the early church, had been reaching out in other countries, had been proselytizing, and now when they get crushed 3 times, they said, this is not healthy. I'm going to quit skateboarding. I'm going to go and the religious school of thought that talked about the imminent coming of God and proselytizing became ridiculed. They thought, okay, this is not, it's like among Protestants and Catholics at one point, they thought, okay, grab the other people and burn them or hang them. One of my relatives was hanged in Switzerland for being the wrong religion at the time. So at any rate, that the people who were the movers and shakers of thought in Jewish thought said, we're gonna dial it back. This is obviously not succeeding, and we have no ability to defeat the empires of the earth.
I hate to cut you off, but we gotta go to church.
Yep, that's it. So that's the end of it. If you wanna give us a quick,
Can you do another quick one?
Can I do another quick one?
Yes.
I can always do another quick one.
Good job, Ann.
Our Heavenly Father, again, we come to thank you for having the ability to learn more about the history of the Jewish faith and their people. We pray for all of those who are on our prayer list, O Lord, lifting up Carol's daughter and the Bowl family and all of the others that we know of. Guide us and direct us that we may live our lives to thee. We ask these things in thy Son's name. Amen.
next week,
Ann, thank you.
next week, we're gonna talk about what factors theologically caused the Jews and the early Christians to be at each other's throats intellectually and led to the sort of hatred, not just competition, but hatred between the two.
Everyone's safe. All right. We'll do
All right.
that.